So your step one in your design bootcamp handout, it's asking you to draw up a schedule of accommodation. And as the handout states, schedule of accommodation is sort of like a list of spaces what you would need in your program. In order to be able to do that, you're going to have a really good idea about what your program is. So for the demonstration of the design bootcamp, what I thought actually that I will come up with my own program and run you through all the different processes of the design bootcamp handout. So in my head, I don't know why, some reason, I decided to start with this idea of creating a micro laundrette. But I also thought about expanding somehow this idea of a laundrette. So initially I thought I'd create a laundrette, which is also a co-working space. And underneath it here, you're going to see the list of rooms or the list of areas I would need for this laundrette. So initially I thought I would need, the most of the space I would need is an area where you would find the washing machines and dryers. I mean, the principal use of a laundrette is that you take your clothes in, you get them washed, you wait for them, or you come back for them, and you get them dried and you take them home. So logically, the next area I thought I would need is an area of seating and waiting. And if we are going with this idea that my laundrette is also a co-working space, then potentially, whilst I'm waiting for my laundry to get done in the washing machines, I would need an area where I can potentially work on my laptop. So I would need a table, maybe a high stool, a chair, and somewhere where I can plug my computer in, and access to a Wi-Fi system. The last area I had listed out here is a clothes forwarding area. I guess you get your clothes washed and dried. You don't want them to get really creased by the time you get home. So it would be nice to have a big table space where you can lay your shirts out and then fold them up nicely and take them home neat. In my initial consideration, as this is a micro program I'm coming up with and I'm designing for, I didn't think that I would have more space for such a small site than maximum of 6 to 8 washing machines. But then I thought, okay, this is good, I have a laundrette, potentially it also functions as a co-working space, but I would like to broaden this a little bit. And I did a bit of brainstorming, which you see on the top here, where I was looking at the laundrette, that what else could happen next to a laundrette? You know, what else, how else can I complement it with different activities? So I was looking at initially this notion of waiting, you know, that I am coming to a space and I am sitting there and I'm just waiting aimlessly for half an hour. So I listed this under interaction, and I had this idea that whilst I'm waiting, why should I just look at my mobile phones? Potentially we can somehow get people in touch with each other, start to get to know each other. So I put down, could this be a laundrette where whilst I'm waiting I can also get to know other people and date? The other idea was that whilst I'm waiting, can I create something productive? So again, chatting, exchanging skills and ideas and knowledge, I came up that maybe it could also be a repair cafe. I don't know if you all know, repair cafes are spaces where people bring their skills and they share it. So for example, I can sew on a sewing machine and you have a shirt which is ripped for some reason, then you bring it in, I fix it for you, and you are pro in fixing bicycles and my bicycle is broken, and therefore we are exchanging these skills and you're potentially able to repair my bicycle. Anyway, but then I went on and I also thought that what else could be happening in a laundrette? I mean, there is an awful lot of time to spend with waiting, so I call this time to kill. And I thought that whilst I'm waiting, why can I again not use this somehow more usefully? So I thought, instead of staring at, for example, my clothes rolling around and going in circles, I thought maybe I can look at some art, so it could also become a laundrette / exhibition space. Another idea I thought, I quite like reading, so I thought, how about having some books and maybe be able to read while I'm waiting for the laundry? And whilst I'm waiting and potentially also looking around is the perfect spot for writers to get inspired, to look at people and then plug their ideas back into their books. So it's like a writer's creative space as well as a library. And last but not least, but I also thought about the environmental impact of a laundrette. And I thought definitely things what a laundrette does, it creates a lot of noise, but some sort of vibration. I guess you all have a tumble dryer or a spin function in your washing machines, and you know what it means, the vibration factor of that. It also creates a lot of moisture and potentially heat. So going on these last ideas, I thought, how about complementing this initial idea of a laundrette and co-working space, which is kind of given, there's no big shakes in that, with something else, something completely different, and harvesting these sort of environmental effects of my laundrette or impact into something more positive. So I know that babies, when they have issues with sleeping, are really helped out by something called a white noise, to sort of mimic the noises what they experienced in their mother's womb. And I thought, how about creating a complementary function which is like a sleep zone for babies? So if you are a young parent and your child doesn't want to go to sleep, you take them out for a walk, you bring them in to the sleep zone, where actually we are going to harvest the vibration and the noise of the washing machines from the laundrette, and you have a couple of hours to kick back, sit in an armchair and look at the pavilion or read some books. So if I'm going with this complementary idea of my program and laundrette co-working space versus sleep zone for babies, in the sleep zone, I thought I need 3 types of spaces. Space for babies to sleep in, so small cribs potentially. Space for parents to sit and relax. And a third element, buggies tend to take up quite a lot of space, so I'm going to need an area, a space to park pushchairs. And going with this realistic idea, again, that it's a micro program and it's quite small, I written down maximum 3 to 4 babies with their respective parents and buggies to be accommodated in this area. So this is going to be my base program, a laundrette, co-working space / sleep zone for babies, and this is what I'm going to show how to design for, or how would I start off designing for myself. Thank you. So your next task 2 is asking you to create a set of iterative sketch diagrams. And when we're asking this, essentially what you are doing, you converting your bullet pointed list of schedule of accommodation into spaces. And by creating a set of diagrams where you're mapping the relationship and relative position of each of these spaces next to each other, it's a really valuable exercise to go from a concept to start to go into, in a sense, design. When you're doing this, it's really important that you watch out for little things like size and sequence. So we are not saying to sketch this into scale, but it is important that you're mindful that, for example, if you have a hobbit in your kitchen, is not represented in your sketch any smaller than, for example, a chair in your restaurant. So just be mindful of that. Step 2 is asking you to actually come up with 3 iterative sketch diagrams where you're mapping out these spatial relationships. And this should be really playful. In my example, what you're going to see, that I actually started to map out a typical condition for any of these. So my first diagram is showing a typical laundrette where you could actually see how, for example, somebody walks in through the door, gets a token, goes to a washing machine, fills it with their clothes, that they go to a bench opposite, they sit down, they wait until their clothes run down in the washing machine and it gets cleaned. They go back to the washing machine to load their basket. They go to the folding space, they fold it up, they put it in their bags and they walk out again. I also try to map out a diagram for a typical sleep zone, but as you might have noticed, that this idea of a baby sleep zone, it's very much an invention of my own head. But I try to be a bit predictable of that what would I need. So going on my schedule of accommodation bullet pointed list, I needed space for buggies, I needed space for little cribs or cots where babies sleep, and potentially an area where the parents who are taking their babies into this facility could relax, kick back and sit down. So potentially armchairs. So what you are seeing in my small diagram here of the typical sleep zone is that how potentially these armchairs where the parents are relaxing are either facing the cots or the cribs, or potentially because your child is asleep and you're not worried, you are really close to them, you might just literally want to relax yourself as a new parent. So you looking out the window, looking at the view. I imagine my design to be situated in the north shelter, so I very much imagine that looking onto the pavilion would be quite a nice, relaxing experience. And you're also going to see these sort of marked red line area, and that represents in my diagram a boundary between inside and outside. So I imagine that the buggies are very much not going to be taken into the space because the space is tiny on the inside, so they're going to be left outside. Now, next moving into an iteration, my first iteration, going from mapping a typical condition, I went into an idea of amalgamating the sleep zone with this idea of a laundrette co-working space. So it's also quite noted that small babies quite like watching washing machines spinning things. So in my scenario, what I imagined that instead of having the sitting arrangement placed directly opposite the washing machines, I would create an area where you lining up your buggies or pushchairs with the drum of the washing machine. And then obviously the most or the least imaginative step, that my sitting area for mums or parents would be just behind there. And I imagined also placing somewhere within the forwarding area and maybe a desk where somebody can work on their laptops. It looks quite conventional, so I kind of like try to move on from that in iteration number 2. So very much the same setup, that I'm amalgamating the two programs somehow, aka the buggies are facing the washing machines, but I changed the seating arrangement. I wanted the mums or anybody who's waiting to socialise a bit better, so I imagined the seating arrangement to be designed that people are facing each other. So there's more opportunity to make an eye contact, there is more opportunity to start a conversation, so people not just face one way or the other. I also imagined that if I came here to wait for my laundry and working in the same time, I would quite like to look out the window and not necessarily watch mums and their buggies in the same space. So I created this sort of area of looking out towards the outside, looking at the view if I came here to work whilst waiting for my laundry. This is all fine. There are pros and cons to both these iterations, but I had to start somewhere. I couldn't come up with the most perfect idea first time round. So that's the reason behind iteration number 3, where actually what I tried to mediate is this issue that babies, especially crying, and people trying to work doesn't really mix. Mums and potentially people who like working in co-working areas, I don't necessarily want to mix, or maybe this is not exactly what I just imagined about my sleep zone. So iteration number 3 is a totally different layout. I actually decided to separate the two areas. So I wanted to give a separate defined area and space for the laundrette. Typical laundrette, washing machines side by side next to each other. But I also thought that it would be quite a nice idea to start tapping into not just the visual aspect of the laundry spinning inside the washing machine, but actually to tap into the other environmental factor of the washing machine is the shake that is actually vibrates, and it's quite a soothing thing potentially for babies beyond the white noise and the visual aspect. So I thought, how about creating this area where the cots can be placed back to back with the washing machines, and or somehow this vibration from the washing machines would be transferred into an area where babies sleep. So I put them side by side, back to back, and I separated the two areas. So in my head, what I'm thinking, that I want to separate the shelter into two halves. And I thought I would like to give a really different kind of identity to both areas. So I imagine my washing machine, my laundrette, to be hub of the community, where people come in and co-work, and people come and sit down and have a chat whilst waiting. So those rectangles and dotted bits you see, they kind of like tables which potentially stick to the outside. Maybe they are rotatable and movable. They can be pushed back in and out of the space, but also somehow would start bringing people in. So they hang out to the road. They're not just inside my space, and it would create a really social laundrette. And the reason why I sort of dotted around the edge of my laundrette space, because I wanted it to be very permeable, very public. On the other side, with red, I had created this area for the sleep zone. And you see this sort of lined edge, and what I'm trying to represent with that, but I want the sleep zone to be a totally different kind of environment, muffled, cocooned. I'd like the wall to be really solid and really really established. So I don't want any permeability. I'd like it to be soothing, dark, potentially a bit the noise being and the shakes being transferred from next door. And also, I imagine somehow the buggy still be on the outside, because space is very, very much limited. But I would like to also provide an area where the parents can relax and maybe look at the view. Right, so next, your synthesize number 1 bootcamp handout is asking you is to actually going from this final iteration diagram to a scaled version of that. So what I would do if I was one of you, I would either, because you don't have a photocopier, I would either use Vectorworks to scan in my iteration sketch and scale it up to roughly a 1:50 version of that. Or the other option is that you kind of redraw it, retrace it by hand on a piece of tracing paper, if you have something like that, and you overlay it on the top of a 1:50 version of the shelter. So, to actually going from something like this, what I'm going to do, I'm removing this page. I'm placing in a 1:50 printout of my shelter drawing. It's actually 1:50 scale is very handy, because as you could see, it fits on an A4 page. So you can do this on your home printer, or if you're doing it, drawing your shelter by hand, it's also possible to do that on an A4 page. And next, what I'm going to do, I am placing this sketch blob diagram on the top of that, just to sort of get a gauge, get an idea of how what I'm imagining proportionally plans out on the existing plan view or scale of the shelter. So yes, have a look at it, because I think it's quite interesting to look at the two in a scaled format. So next, your bootcamp handout is actually asking you to start working to scale, to get yourself some so-called vignettes, little diagrams to scale, representing key parts of your program. So I asked everybody, and you find this link online on Student Central, to go to a website called CAD Blocks. And what you find there is a lot of programs and activities as sort of like line art, as a set of diagrams. So once you manage to find your own, what I would suggest that you get these scaled in Vectorworks, and you print them out and cut them out, ideally on a piece of tracing paper. Also, again, you're going to need to use your shelter drawing at 1:50. If you don't have a printer, at home, then unfortunately you're going to have to redraw it at 1:50. If you do have a printer, just print one on an A4 page. Please make sure when you're printing any of your architectural drawings that you untick the box on the printer called fit, because if your fit button is ticked, that means it's going to either scale your drawing down or stretch it up to enable you to fit it on an A4 page. So untick that, definitely untick that. So get your vignettes. I have mine here. So as you could see, I have a set of washing machines to scale, 1:50 scale. I have a mum pushing a pram. I cut out individual washing machines, so I have a sense of flexibility. This is actually me photographed from my upstairs window, pretending I'm putting something in a washing machine in a plan view. So this is supposed to be me bending over and filling a washing machine. So you can also get somebody to photograph you, then you print yourself out as a line drawing. I have somebody representing a parent sitting in an armchair. There is somebody working at a standing desk on a laptop. So I have a lot of bits and bobs here. There is another buggy being pushed. I also have some little cod beds. Look how cute they are to represent my babies. But the most important thing, that they are all to scale at 1:50. And I guess this is the moment when you're going to remember that we asked you at some point to analyze your program and to understand the dimensions and details of key activities and key tools within your design. So at that point, if I was thinking to design, my program is going to be a laundrette, then I would have had to go to the architect's pocketbook to find out dimensions data in terms of the size of a typical industrial laundrette washing machine. Similarly, I would have had to do the same with a buggy. So, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to arrange these little vignettes around the page, and I am going to represent my initial idea, my final iterational diagram to scale with these little vignettes. So I'm going to put, sorry, I'm just finding them on the side here. If I'm placing these side by side, on one side, as you could see, are my little cots. On the other side, I have the washing machines. And although you only see 4 washing machines there, but I imagine them being stacked, so it's potentially 8. Look, I also have me here filling the washing machine. How much space would I need to do that activity? It's a bit fiddly because they are tiny and they're kind of like going to move around a little. And this is me with a basket taking my clothes out. So this is a basket, typical size basket there. Let's just see this gentleman working on the standing desk. So as we remember, the shutter is really narrow, it's about 1 meter wide. So if I put somebody there with a standing desk, it would take up quite a lot of space. Let's put this somebody into watching their baby in an armchair. I'm just deliberately sort of like placing them slightly outside the shelter, because the next thing we are going to do, oh look, he's looking at the Brighton Pavilion, not worried about baby sleeping really well, not worrying too much. I am getting the mums to park up the buggies there. Buggies take up loads of space. There's another somebody with their child and their buggy. So yes, it's very clear that the shelter is tiny. So what I imagined, represented at a correct scale, it's going to be a real struggle to fit it in. So this is the moment when I'm starting a new set of iterations. And at this point, it's really important that I'm going to also talk to the building codes, to look at the building codes, what we had agreed. How can I change the existing fabric of the shelter? What can I take out? What can I add in? How can I manage to fit all my great design ideas into this and also make something quite beautiful? Also, once you have one layout, make sure that you are sketching it. So my next step is going to be to show you a sketch representation of this layout. Or actually, sorry, I'm not showing this one again because you already had a sketch layout of this being drawn in the previous exercise. Sorry, then I'm putting in more standing desks inside and outside of the shelter. Yeah? Okay, so iterations are coming. So in my next set of scaled iterations, what I thought I sort of demonstrate is that how I'm changing. I quite like this idea of separation of the two programmatic elements into two separate spaces. But let's try it. Let's work it in a different direction, different way with the existing shelter. So what I had done, I turned around my sketch diagram, and I just wanted to look how it looks in a plan to scale. And what I rigorously started to do, besides that I don't really like it, I can't quite put my finger in why I don't like this way around, this proposal, but I also started to be quite logical about it. And you all have the building codes, which we set all together, the design codes, so I'm just using it into the screen and gently out of the screen. I hope it's not going to confuse anybody, but for this demonstration, I am using the building code from last year. So if I'm contradicting any of the points made in this year's building codes, apologies, please, of course, use this year's one, but I only had last year's one to hand, so I'm working on that. So what I started to do, this sort of design idea, this sort of diagrammatic vignette model in plan, I started to assess against the building codes. So I was looking at the different points of the building codes. And technically speaking, Code A talked about the maximum horizontal projection last year, and I am absolutely fine. Last year, what we allowed to happen, that the shelter could be, the size, the plan view, the plan size of the shelter could be increased up until 300%. So if I was going to make this proposal, I am well within fitting in the 300% extension, so I should be fine. Also, at the moment, I am not proposing an upstairs. I'm sure that this year's building code talks about what happens if we are creating extensions vertically, but at the moment I'm not looking at any of that, so I should be fine again. But what's not really working, for example, based on last year's building codes, that we set that any sort of proposal, any sort of extension, should be quite sympathetic to the geometry of the shelters. And what I fear here is that this sort of random protrusion, which I'm just proposing here, is really completely working against the aesthetics and this sort of long, elongated, curved shape, capsule, lens shape of the shelter. So I don't think it's very sympathetic. It's quite bulky. It sticks out too much. It doesn't really got a right to do that. It's sort of towards the shelter itself. So that's one downside. That's one reason I guess I don't like it. Also, if I'm thinking about the requirements for my program, that on the top we have the sleep zone, and as I said in the previous parts of the video, I would really like the sleep zone to be quite a muffled area, muffled from daylight, but also muffled from noise. And I don't think it really happens here. In fact, as you could see that I set up my north shelter. This is north here, I'm pointing. The sleep zone here is placed on the westerly side of the shelter itself. This is the road where the bus used to go. That means that this area here would get the majority of the daylight in the afternoon. I don't want that. I quite like to block the area of the sleep zone almost completely from sunlight. The other thing, in the building code, in last year's building code, we talked about blocking this area from passers-by. And I feel like somehow the sleep zone itself sort of eats in too much of the public footpath. So people who would really have to get out their way or even sort of make their way around to the pavilion lawns to be able to walk around it. And I don't really like that. And last but not least, again, reverting back to the makeup of the shelter and the structure of the shelter, as we had discussed throughout our survey in semester 1 and through drawing up the shelter and all the technology of the shelter, we talked about the structural grid of the shelter. And as you all remember, there are a set of columns supporting the roof in the shelter. Now, it feels like here, this area would completely jeopardize that. It would sort of eliminate these columns between the frames, or even potentially here, and that wouldn't be very realistic either. So all in all, it was worth sort of testing this as an idea or as a potential. How about sort of turning my idea on its head 90 degrees this way and testing this, but I don't really like it. And what's more to the point, it doesn't also comply with our said building code. So far we had been sketching and working to scale with these vignettes in a plan view. And as the design bootcamp synthesize number 1 handout states in step number 3, every time when you make a move in plan, also try to test it in sectional elevations. I mean, I'm not 100% exploring here my ideas. I'm just showing you that how you can think about it. Also, apologies, I don't have quite the right drawing section through my shelter. I only just had an elevation, but I think it's also fine just to represent what I'm trying to do. But yes, you're going to need to print out a section view of your shelter on an A4 page, and also from the CAD Block website you could start downloading these little vignettes and scaling them to 1:50, but these also exist in elevation. So here I have a lady who's representing somebody working at the standing desk. Here I have myself, I photographed myself pretending putting something in a washing machine. I also improvised and drawn some washing machine on their side. Apologies for the man smoking in a baby sleep zone, terrible, but I couldn't find any other picture of somebody sitting in a comfy armchair. But he really demonstrates a good sort of scaled version of the spatial extent of what is it like somebody sitting in an armchair. And here I have a mum sort of like leaning into a buggy and a full-size buggy. I also have a front-on view of washing machines, a wall of washing machines, and I also have an elevation of view of a cot or a crib. So every time when you do this, I think it's worth taking your plan and underneath it drawing it in a section, especially if you are thinking, obviously I'm not proposing to put washing machines on the top of the shelters, but especially if you're thinking to move on the top to create a level change in your designs, it's very important that you start understanding the height you are creating with that. And again, refer back to the building codes. Is the height you are proposing still complying with the building codes? So it's worth having a quick look. What we are going to look at next time, also what's really important to mention here, that this exercise should not just be literally pushing furniture around, yes? So this whole modelling with the vignettes in plan and section should not be one of those IKEA kitchen planner exercises. What you also got to bear in mind that it's important that you start testing your ideas spatially. So the next bootcamp iterate is the one where you're taking these two-dimensional ideas and you're moving into 3D. And I felt that in my design process, actually, the vignettes and the plan view is not really helping me thinking further, that how would I like to improve all those design moves I had shown so far. So I will move into three-dimensional modeling. And at the same time, I will be modeling 3D, but I'm also going to sketch and draw these iterations what I'm creating with my models. So I'm doing both. I'm drawing and modeling, and sometimes when I model, then I draw that afterwards. So at the moment, the way you are watching these set of instructions for the bootcamp, it's a very linear process. It would be very difficult to do it any other way. But in real life, when you are designing, it's not a linear process at all. It should be a back and forth thing, where you are modeling something in a plan view, and then all of a sudden you're trying it in a section or elevational view, and then really quickly you make a model of it, and then reflecting back of your findings from the model into a new proposal in a plan. So please be mindful of that. And in a second, you're going to see my models and how I move on with these ideas. Right, welcome everybody in Design Bootcamp, Camp to Iterate, where what we are hoping to move on our worked out layout from plan and section into 3D. And I guess on that note, this is probably the most dreaded sort of steps we as tutors can ask you at this moment of time under the current conditions, because I can hear all of you saying that, oh, but how do I model? You know, I don't have a workshop at home, I don't have anything I can model with. But what we thought, we tried to make sense of this, even under these conditions, and we created a set of videos which we called the junk modeling section, provided courtesy of Pete, amazing videos to show you ways around how can you create really good, legible, scaled 1 to 50 models at home, in your kitchen, in your bathroom, out of leftover products of your household, such as cornflake boxes, vitamin boxes, tubs, washing up liquid tubs, toilet rolls, anything you can just lay your hands on. So please don't worry. There are ways around this, and I am really confident that it's going to work. It's going to be a bit more adventurous, and we're going to have to think more outside the box. But hey ho, these are adventurous times. But just to confirm, for the demonstration of this video, I am going to use blue foam, and I 100% understand that none of you got this at home, and this is not a requirement. This is just what I had left over from my previous preparation of this workshop. What I'd like you to do to watch the video and take the principles from it, and every element of the making you should take from Pete's new junk modeling video set. So, if you remember, in Camp 1, Synthesize, we actually created a proposed design layout through various sketched iterations in plan and section or elevation, and now I'm hoping to actually move this on by moving into 3D. So to recap, I'm sure you all remember that this was my final sort of proposal for my layout, but this is still very much in a sketch sort of realm, sketch diagrammatic realm, where I had my laundrette co-working space on this side, on the left-hand side, and I have my sleep zone area on the right-hand side of the shelter. I was kind of, after various testings, I was most happy with this. I decided that I'd like to divide the shelter into these two halves, where actually in the middle, the core tools of my laundrette, the washing machines, will be providing something really quite crucial for my sleep zone, which is the vibration and potentially the white noise. So these need to be side by side, back to back, responding to each other. I also tested various layouts, but this is what I'd like to sort of take further, because I thought that this is allowing me most to work with the existing geometry of the shelters. And let's take it from there. So I'm going to show you various sort of like quick 1 to 50 model iterations next. So taking this diagrammatic plan view off, I thought I'd show you something next, such as my washing machine vignettes at the center of the shelter. And I think what's really quite obvious that as it stands at the moment, if I was going to try to fit in my, well, it looks full, but they are double stacked, as I said in a previous video. If I'm trying to fit in 8 washing machines to the existing geometry of the shelter at the center, that would not work. It sort of like hangs out on either side. It doesn't even kind of fit underneath the overhang of the roof. So something is just not quite right. Other considerations you or I must remember in moving on with my iterations is that I aimed that this side, and I'm going to draw this, in a second I'm going to pop this out, so that I really imagine that if I'm dividing the shelter into sort of 2 halves, so I'm putting this sort of dividing line in the center, this sort of wall in the center, I imagined one side to be super social and penetrable, this area here, and I really wanted the other side, where the cribs and the sleep zone is, to be, sorry, the right pen, to be very much this sort of area of muffled, protected from the outside world. That I didn't want any other noise than the white noise of the washing machines to penetrate through here. Ideally, I don't really want any westerly daylighting to come in, so afternoon daylight to come into my sleep zone, and this is my starting premise. So I thought that if we talking walls, I literally wanted to take that seriously. Oh, 2 quick things I had forgotten to say. In my building code, which is slightly different to yours because I'm using last year's building codes, I'm taking 2 things into consideration, or I'd like to do 2 things. I want to build into this area here underneath the canopy, and to my memory it's kind of forbidden by you guys, you didn't allow to do that, but I'd like to build on into the underside of the canopy. And also, really crucial one, which again I'm not sure, I can't remember top of my head whether we allowed this or not, but as long as I am keeping the structural columns between the window panes, so I'm taking the structure of the shelter into consideration, I am allowed to take all these panels out from underneath the window. So these are really important starting points, I've forgotten to say. So next, what I want to show is that how I move this on. At the moment I have a half and half scenario, washing machine versus cots. As I said, I can't even fit the washing machines underneath the canopy, although I'm permitted to do that, but it doesn't fit. So my next idea was that how about actually start turning these. So what would happen if I started to divide this space, but actually more in an angle like so, that I would have a little bit more space on either side, but also potentially I would have additional benefits, that my washing machines could potentially fit in the middle, and additional perks potentially is that this wall here would be able to block some of the daylight here on this side in the afternoon. It would cast a shadow for this area here, around here. So to show you one of my first iterations on this variation, now I'm going to jump into my blue foam variation. So let me take out the wall. I'm going to take out the washing machines. I am popping in my 1 to 50 variation of the shelter out of the blue foam, and although I'm not doing quite the angle what I just proposed there, but one of my first ideas was that how about dividing the shelter like this instead of going through right in the middle there. It's kind of interesting, but I am not convinced that it is actually going to give me anything other than what I would have with the going down straight version. So I'm putting this on one side. Then here came the next idea, that I am actually moderating this crazy angle I'm putting in. And this start to, you could see because of my lighting conditions, that this is really starting to create an interesting shadow effect. Onto the ground. But again, I felt like potentially I can do even better than this. So my next variation is keeping the angle, but actually here modeling now that I am building into the underhang of the shelters. But I started to look into a different kind of wall, maybe a wall which is not as thin, maybe a wall which is actually in itself, I was going to show it, this is kind of the right angle, that it's also in an angle in itself, and starts to sit. Sorry, I'm turning it around so you guys could see it better, I'm just in a plan view. But starts to put everything into an angle. And by this, you could see that around here, my shadow effect is slightly different. So it starts to create this sort of muffling, it starts to create this shading from daylighting effect, what I really wanted. So what purpose would this wall serve? In my imagination, can you imagine the sectional profile of it? What I hoped that actually, sorry, I'm trying to get it in the picture, that the washing machine would sit inside it. And this wall, although it looks quite monolithic, it would be made out of sustainable materials, such as something like a timber stud walling, which would be tied together in the center with steel boards, which would allow this sort of vibration to be carried through from one side to the other side. And not last but least, at the moment, the way I'm modeling this, that I am cutting the shelter in half, but that would not happen in real life. It would look like it's cutting the shelter in half, but it would go through in such a moment with the shelters that would not jeopardize the structural columns. So it would kind of make it look like it's cutting it into half, but it isn't. And as I say, I would look a sustainable construction method, such as a stud wall, which I can clad with anything I want, make it look like any other material. But this would create a reversible design. We don't want to make a final damage to the shelters. We don't want it to be irreversible, what we are creating here. So that's why it's really important, and I'm trying to emphasize this. So I'm kind of happy with this idea of I got my wall, and my wall now changed from something thin to something really bulky, which can house the washing machines in 2 stacks here. It would stick out through the roof, so it would be a statement. And very much my inspiration at this point was somebody like Daniel Libeskind, for example, in his design for one of the war museums, I think in Dresden, or I'm also thinking of another case study or precedent from Propeller Z in the Museums Quarter in Vienna, which I'm going to show you pictures of. So I'm definitely making a statement here, but also this statement is not just self-fulfilling. What I'm trying to do is to make it as functional as possible. So moving on, I'm not quite happy with this yet, but I think I am on the right track. So my next variation on this was that I had a more acute angle. So I'm not going through at the center of the shelter. Also, it needs to be the other way around, sorry. so that it goes through the shelter like so. But the problem with this is again the space inside the shelter, that I wouldn't have much space to house all the other functions inside the laundrette and also inside the sleep zone. So again, I'm sort of liking this angle here. I'm liking it that the wall itself is in an angle, but I'm not quite happy with the angle seemingly cutting through the shelter. So my final and last move. So what I am getting here is plenty of shading here on this side. I am getting this sort of muffling effect. I can house my washing machines, but I'm also getting something. This wall, I also imagine that here, where it's sticking out of front of the laundrette, it slightly diverts people's path, so people would have to walk around it, but it's not completely obstructive. And I'm also hoping to actually have folding down standing desks, so when the weather is permitting, people can work on the outside of my laundrette. So it's creating a connection between the street and the design itself. People would definitely notice it. People would want to investigate because it's kind of like slightly cutting into their direction. But it's also helping with all my aims for my design. So for the purpose of this video, I haven't taken my sketch modeling any further. This is more around just getting an idea, a basic idea through modeling to move your designs on from a plan and section and elevations. But I guess the next step would be to actually investigate that how the washing machine is sitting inside this wall. What sort of material would it look like on the outside? How do I imagine the outside wall of the shelter? Where would be structural openings, doors there? How would, on the other side, the cots sit inside this wall? What would the space be inside the sleep zone? I somehow imagine to have a really nice deep window seat. So I would have a very thick wall. But would also allow people to sort of sit on the edge of that and look towards the pavilion. And I would try to make this and concentrate more on how the internal workings of this space would work. This is very much demonstrating what I imagine for the outside of this to work, and not really focusing on actually working out the interiors yet. So that would be my next step. And in camp Materialize, in the next camp, what you guys are going to have to decide to find case studies and start to understand that what sort of materials and systems would you use to make something like this come true. So I would definitely have to look into a cladding system with a stud wall. I would have to look into soundproofing, or in fact, in my case, to counteract soundproofing. And all the rest of it. But for now, thank you for watching.